Today's either 69 or day 70 of the genocide in Gaza. Um, and I hope people don't start looking away. I know it can
Mm,
get exhausting after a war has been going on for a very long time. But one thing I do appreciate about the content that we've been able to offer is that we've been covering the movement that's been pushing for a ceasefire across the US, across the West, and including across the global South, which I feel like, we can't lose sight of the fact that this is still ongoing and that we like the people in Gaza are literally depending on those of us outside to be their voices because they've literally been cut off from the world. I think there's like a complete communications blackout right now.
mm. Yeah, I mean, seems to happen very regularly, and obviously, the deaths, the expansion of disease, which seems to be happening quite significantly now because of the disruption in sewer services and different elements like that. The total collapse of the healthcare system. I mean, we could go on and on and on, but it's getting increasingly dire there. And in the winter months, of course, there's heavy rains on a regular basis, and now you have hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people living outdoors in tents and areas that aren't really set up to address some of the issues that come in response to that. So the level of humanitarian suffering only getting more and more dire. I mean, until a couple months ago, we said that Yemen was the world's worst humanitarian crisis, and it is very bad. So we don't want to forget that as well. But it certainly seems to have now that title, unfortunately, moved to Gaza. But on that note, we are going to turn the page to some of the more controversial issues as it concerns how the issue of what's been happening vis-a-vis Palestinian struggle for liberation in the past couple months has affected the conversation about who to support, how to support them, what's right, what's wrong, and how that all looks. And for that conversation, we are very happy to be joined here by the editor-in-chief of BreakThrough News, Ben Becker, who is partially joining us for other reasons because he recently wrote an article called Building a Real Left, Not One That Condemns Resistance and Is Without Palestinians, which you can find on liberationnews.org. Dr. Ben Becker, thank you for joining us here on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Well, very good to have you here. I guess my first question I'll always ask, I read the title, Building a Real Left, Not One That Condemns Resistance and Is Without Palestinians. What led you to write this article?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that in a way we've been in a moment where we've seen mass unity on the left. And the last month and a half in particular, where we've seen people in the streets almost every single night. And I think, that's been amazing. I've been part of that. Many others I know who watch the show and organize have been part of that, seen this truly mass anti-war movement that's growing really in defense of the Palestinian people when it's so obvious that who the occupier is, who the aggressor is, that who the colonizer is, sort of the moral clarity has been there in these last 6 weeks, especially of bombardment, siege, genocide. But that does not mean we should forget that there was an initial period of, I would say, considerable confusion, even among people who are leftists, progressives, who theoretically and abstractly stand with Palestine in all times, especially right after October 7th, where there was sort of this thing where people were putting an equal sign between the two sides, condemning both sides, saying they support sort of the Palestinian right to resist in general. But then when it has any concreteness, they were running away from it very quickly. In particular, Naomi Klein, Michelle Goldberg, some of the leading sort of lights of left liberal politics, I would say more liberal than left. And it's not just a matter of setting the historical record straight, which I think has value in and of itself as a historian, but also I think because we could be entering a new phase of the Palestinian struggle where it's not just about one side being on the receiving end of bombs, but this could actually intensify into a more regular and intense war in which there are counteroffensive, in which other countries in the region, not to mention the Palestinians, are striking back at Israel. There could be more fighting in the West Bank. There could be more fighting in 48. And if that happens, we don't want to return to that moment of confusion where everyone runs away and says, well, all sides are bad and this is a complicated thing. And I'll stand with Palestinians only if they are committed to civil disobedience that's nonviolent, which, of course, the Palestinian people, and this is what my article goes through, have a long tradition of trying many different tactics. It's not like the October 7th was the first attempt to sort of strike back at the colonial occupation. When they went in the Great March of Return, nonviolently, they were shot down. So the people who came on October 7th really returned to the same places where their nonviolent protests of the Palestinian people had been repressed, and this time they came with arms. So I think it's important to review some of the history that we've just been through the last 2 months, because the next few months or years could be a phase of actually more intense war.
I refer to a poll here to not just back up what you're saying, but then to get your response. There's this poll by a very well-known and highly respected polling outfit. It's called the Palestinian Center for Policy and Survey Research. And it conducted this poll during the week-long pause back in early December in Gaza, Jerusalem, and the West Bank. So it's not all Palestinians, but it's a pretty good I guess thermometer is the right word of general Palestinian opinion in these places. And the majority of respondents, 81%, said they believe Hamas's attack on the October 7th was a response to longstanding Israeli attacks on Palestinians and their holy places and aimed at releasing prisoners. More importantly, the majority, 72%, believed the decision to launch the attack was the right one despite the costs. And that's actually that goes up to 82% in Gaza and then 82% in the West Bank and 57% in Gaza. Popularity of Hamas has gone up with 72% saying they're satisfied with the role of Hamas right now, and then 11% saying they're satisfied with Mahmoud Abbas, who the Palestinian Authority leader that the U.S. is supporting and also trying to give control of Gaza to. But anyway, sorry, I won't ramble on too long here. I just want to get to something very, very important, which is when we're talking about the issue of Palestinians and what to support and who to support. The number supporting armed struggle in the West Bank is 68%, which has doubled in the last 2 years. And then 69% overall support a return to armed confrontations, which is up 11% from September. So, I'm just curious, Ben, after hearing some of those numbers, how do we take those numbers and understand them in the context of how we are supposed to be talking about Palestine on the left, given the sort of wishy-washy stuff we saw after October 7th?
Yeah, I think these are crucial poll numbers that everyone should familiarize themselves and in a way memorize. It doesn't mean that we from outside have to say, well, if I were Palestinian, how I would have responded to each one of those poll questions. You're not obligated to support this or that party or this or that tactic inside of Palestine from the outside. But you are obligated to grapple with those numbers. You are obligated, actually, if you're a serious activist, to try to get to that question. Why is it that the support for armed struggle has gone up it's doubled in the last couple of years? Why did that happen? That's not because Palestinians are prone to violence and, just love the gun and have a, sort of a romantic view of it. These are people who have lived through the worst forms of occupation, expulsion, displacement, and genocide, and have seen that only intensify. They've seen Israeli politics move further to the right. They've seen the international community and all the sort of treaties and promises of all these types of solutions all fall by the wayside. That's why people have arrived at this. And those numbers about support for Hamas on October 7th, that again is not that Hamas has not always been as popular as it is right now. So we have to grapple with that. If we're serious about building a left that involves the people who are under the gun, the people who are under occupation, we have to really understand the sentiments that are driving that community. And that's why if you get up and you condemn the resistance, you condemn all the things that 70 to 80 to 90% of people are supporting, you're going to build basically a left of the West that doesn't include the Muslim and Arab community in particular, but also other colonized peoples, nationally oppressed peoples in the United States and around the world. This is the sentiment that's been growing in the global South as a whole. So the question is the left in the United States trying to build sort of a abstract and pure, politics around basically saying, well, we're against occupation in the abstract, or are we trying to actually unite with the social force, a huge section of humanity that's rising up right now?